Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast. This is a special milestone episode today, episode 100. And we thought that we would do something a little different and work with you on this new piece of work that has been quite consuming for us and has been taking up a bit of our bandwidth, which is the 25 questions that every entrepreneur must answer. Now, we're already going to break the mold because it's actually not just this episode, it's across a couple of episodes. But I wanted to just take a moment and say it's great to hit episode 100. Only about 5% of podcasts make it to episode 100. And yeah, it's really nice to have made this far. And frankly, I feel quite blessed to have made it to this point because I really started with one intent, which is still driving me today, is I just want to have interesting conversations with interesting people. So today I'm joined by Andreas and Richard from our firm, and we're going to have a talk today about the 25 questions that every entrepreneur must answer. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you both today?
Very, very excited to be back after the summer series. We were just wondering what's the next opportunity that we will have, and this is it. And what's better than 100th episode?
Yes, milestones. Milestones are so important. Looking forward to this one.
Very good, very good. So why might we need to ask these questions? One might think, well, you've got a book called Made to Thrive, and that's about the 5 roles of a CEO, and that's got checklists in it. Well, the first book, Made to Thrive, is about the 5 roles of a CEO, and it's focused on the leader predominantly. It's how you can move from being a good leader to a great leader by understanding and executing those roles well. And there is a checklist in there. Next is the System for New Hire Performance, which is the 2 books, Onboarded and Onboarded for Managers. And they are really a system. There's no real checklist in there, but there's a system to work through to reduce onboarding debt. And then is the most recent book, which came out in October last year, and that is the 5 areas of a compounding mindset. And that is bigger isn't better, better is better. And that has a checklist in there across a better team, better customers, better offering, better financials, and a better life by design. And there is a checklist in there. So why would we possibly want another checklist? Well, what we're talking about today is the 5 disciplines of growth. And we're calling it the Compounding Growth Scorecard. So this is focused on growth, where the others were focused on being a good leader, the new hire, and the mindset. This is focused on growth. So it's a comprehensive assessment revealing where the business is, but importantly, what's holding it back. It's like taking your temperature. So with all of that, and I'll just point out that this assessment is available on our website today, and you can go in there and go through, and it'll take 2 to 4 minutes, depending on how fast you click, and you'll be able to go through all of these questions and get a comprehensive understanding of where you're at. My question for Richard and Andreas, you've been involved in the development of the Bigger Isn't Better book, and that's got an assessment, but also you've seen over your illustrious careers many assessments come through. So what do you think that is different about this, or what insights do you think that entrepreneurs are going to take from this assessment in particular?
Yeah, it's really, for me, the idea that this is a complete assessment of the business that complements kind of the assessment like Made to Thrive of their role. And it puts the 2 things together, but it almost acts like a bit of a stress test. It sort of asks you to perhaps not lie to yourself or gloss over a fact, and it confronts you. And I think that's good. I think a good stress test should confront you and undo those little lies we sometimes tell ourselves when we're running businesses.
What I actually take from that is there is a 3-view assessment, or as you said, Richard, that stress test of the business. It's not just the business, but it talks about the owner, it talks about the leadership team, and it talks about the broader team. And mainly, it's very practical, no BS explanation that if you didn't do this, or if you didn't have this will be the impact for you, owner, for you, leadership team, and for you, broader team. And as I read it, it is an authentic, no BS, practical guide on what would be the impact on that.
I had a client that we've been working with probably for 7 or 8 years, run it, close friend, and his comment to me was it gave us a really good understanding of how far we've come and what the opportunities are, because we don't feel like there's a ceiling. We feel like we can continue to improve, and it gave us clarity on not only what the opportunities are, but why we should spend our effort and why we should be working toward that. I mean, you don't just go away to the wine region of your city or state and write a business plan and everything works out well, right? It takes time to evolve a plan. So let's jump into what are the 5 disciplines that we're talking about here. Again, this is on our homepage, evolutionpartners.com.au. You can scroll down and you'll see that assessment in bright lights there. Very, very easy to complete. So we're talking about 5 areas, and we're going to use this episode series to go through those in more detail and the questions that are within there and why they're really important. So the 5 areas that we're looking at are vision, first of all. It's the shared destination that align people behind the leader. Next is strategy. So strategy, under Michael Porter's definition, is a unique and valuable position in the market that is different from the competitors. And it's really, in our context here, a clear set of choices saying who to serve and who not to serve, and how to do it differently. Then is leadership. So it's the organization's ability to carry itself, to really perform well, getting the right people doing the right things the right way at every level in the organization. Next is execution. So it's the system that ensures the business plans are consistently delivered and that the profit drops to the bottom line. And then finally, the economic engine, the understanding of what drives profitability and cash and managing it deliberately so that you can earn above industry average return on profit. So let's jump into each of the questions, starting with vision. Vision is the operating view of the business. It's driven by the leader, the leadership, and it gets people to be proud of the business and to get people really simply to understand, why am I devoting my creative energies here? And so what the assessment is doing, it's asking 5 areas in each of these 5 disciplines. So the first question for vision is, our company's purpose and core values are clearly defined and are guiding decisions. So what does it mean if we think about that question, to be guiding decisions? Why is that so important, that purpose and values are defined? Okay, we know what that means, but why is it so important that they're guiding decisions? Richard, would you like to kick us off perhaps?
Yeah, for me, this is like the most important thing when I'm talking to a group in the first workshop, and it brought to mind for me, I was in one recently where I'd asked the client in advance, can you send me anything you have on purpose and values? And they said, well, we don't have a purpose. And that sort of, you just let that sit with you for a second. We don't have a purpose. And then I said, okay, fine. We can work on that. We'll build one. That's fantastic. Tell me about your values. And they said, oh yeah, we've got those. I said, oh, okay, great. Fantastic. And these things guide you in behavior and they tell us what good looks like. Yep, absolutely. So they sent it over to me and it was an ISO 27001 quality standard repurposed as the core values. And so what they were saying is that they were only following these because it was in a somewhat self-serving way going to help them meet their ISO audit standards. So there was no real values here. And so as a consequence, it had no impact actually on how people really worked. And when we did the exercise to actually develop their values, they might have been 180 degrees apart from their initial ISO quality standards. So that, plus then working on purpose, we finally got to something where everybody went in the room and said, oh, that's us. I said, well, that's us is what we want everybody in the entire company to feel. That's us.
Yeah, I think that why is it so important is authentic is the word that comes to mind. Guiding decisions is one part of it, but it's authentic. A company is just people doing stuff, right? So getting the people aligned to do that stuff matters. One of the slides that we show teams is a picture of a core values poster that has 21 values on it. Now, I don't know how you can try to run a business with 21 core values, but I can say that I don't think anyone, even the leadership team, are going to remember all 21 and that they're actually going to be useful. So it doesn't really say what they are, and it isn't really guiding decisions. Andres, why is it so important that values and purpose are guiding decisions?
Because when we don't have a set of behaviors that are driving decisions, a consistent set of behaviors, then people are just making decisions on instinct or what they think is right. And the more people that you have, the more chances are that people probably will assume with good intent, yeah, this is the right decision, but it's not really aligned to what we initially thought. There's one of our clients, a hospitality company in Downsborough, which is 3 hours from the city of Perth. That's when they started to work on that set of behaviors 3 years ago. And right now, they have more than 100 people working for them. And still, even if they are paid by the hour perhaps, or backpackers during the summer, they all follow that set of behavior that is so well known that even the owners, when they are stress testing, hey, how would you react like this or like that? Or in a real scenario, when customers are asking different things, people on the floor, the people making the coffee, not necessarily the managers, are making the right decisions. And they are actually really proud of that.
Yeah, that's great. Let's talk about question 2. Our company has a clear long-term goal, 10 to 30 years. Now, Jim Collins calls this the big, hairy, audacious goal. This long-term goal cascades to 3-year, 1-year, and 90-day priorities. So we're saying it's not just out there. Many companies might have a long-term goal. Some companies might say it's a 5-year goal, but we're really saying a long-term goal that's clear, 10 to 30 years, and that goal cascades into the 3-year and the 1-year and the 90 days. So what does it mean to cascade, and why is cascading so important? Richard?
Well, for me, it's this idea that if you start at the end and work backwards, every decision, going back to the first question, but every decision, every piece of activity lines up. You can actually say, if we do this, that means we can't help but do this. And it's this interesting moment when you move from just random priorities of stuff that has to be done to, no, we're actually going to build our capabilities in support of our BHAG. We're going to build our differentiation in support. So the priorities, you can tell when it works, because the priorities, there's almost like you can draw a line from right now to 90 days to 1 year to 3 years to 10 years.
And it cascades down and it cascades up. Again, I think of a slide that we've got where the BHAG tells us what to do in the 3HAG or the 3-year goal, tells us what to do in the 1 year, tells us what to do in the 90-day. And then the 90-day, when we achieve things for the 90-day, it helps us to execute the 1 year, helps us to execute the 3 year, and then it helps us to achieve the long-term goal there. I think there's I come back to a Harvard Business School study where 90% of strategies fail due to poor execution. And it really makes me think that there is no point having a strategy or a long-term goal if you can't execute it. And that's really for us why the first year is about building an execution machine. We've got to be able to execute. And one of the parts of that is making sure that the things that we are informed by our longer term goals in the area. And that's really what Stephen Covey calls his quadrant 2, working on or finding the time to work on things that are not urgent and important. Andres?
Imagine that we're doing work and many listeners right now are thinking, but we do have priorities. We are working towards our goal. Now, the question that we are stating here is, there's a keyword. It's a clear long-term goal. How clear is that? When we work with leaders, many times we hear, we want to be the best one. We want to be the biggest one. And that's sort of the goal. Yeah, but what does it really mean? So then we can actually run this test. How many of your priorities quarter after quarter, year after year, are actually built around achieving that. If we don't really understand that level of clarity in what actually means that long-term goal, we don't really know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, because what a listener can do is a quick stress test of the stress test question might be, if you look at your quarterly priorities for the leadership team at the moment, for the most senior people in the business, what percentage of those are actually connected to the long-term goal, or even 1 year or 3 year or longer term? And how many of those have just floated in from other parts of the business? So question 3, our vision. So we're kind of wrapping up vision here, saying vision is purpose, values, and long-term goal. Now, long-term goal, or BHAG, should be informed by the hedgehog, and hedgehog contains purpose. So there's a bit of a self-fulfilling loop there in a sense, but let's not get hung up on that. Our vision is regularly communicated and clearly understood by all team members. So one of the important points that we've tried to do in the assessment is not make it binary. So in Bigger and Better, you can rate yourself 8 out of 10 or higher. In Made to Thrive, it's a tick or a cross. Whereas here, what we've tried to do is say, well, the leadership team all understand that, or no, they don't, or the whole business do. So why is understanding the vision, purpose, values, long-term goal, or BHAG, why is that so important, the understanding part? I'll start with Andreas.
The key here is most leadership teams, perhaps, they will say, oh, we do understand it, but the people doing the work are not really them. And if the people doing the work are not really understanding, then it's not truly communicated. And I seem to be in this role of stress testing the stress testing question. But a quick test that the listeners can do right now is ask your 2-month new hire about the vision and how well they understand that. That's going to reflect on how well you are repeating yourself as a leader over and over again. It's probably reflecting as well on the level of character that you have as a leader. That's how I see that importance of communication.
Richard.
Yeah, for me, it's one of my favorite things to do is after we've done a quarterly is I'll go into a client's office, and my test of whether or not they're actually reminding their audience, their next level of leaders, is, so what's the purpose of the company? Just pop quiz, and have a little bit of fun with it. And you usually get the leadership team is fresh, right? So they're like, the purpose is this and our goal is this. And then I say, okay, I'm just going to grab a coffee. And you go to the coffee machine, you bump into somebody, and let's say it's Alana from finance, and you know her well, and you ask her the same question, and you can tell if there's this sort of dumbfounded, I have no idea who you are and why you're asking me this alien-like question, versus, oh no, we're here to create moments of joy, and we're going to measure it this way, and right now we're focused on doing this. You hear any version of that, then you know this is really happening in the business versus it's just sitting on the wall.
Yes, yeah, because I feel like there is a few different stages here. First of all, there isn't one, or it's not there and not documented. It's documented and understood by the leadership, might be a second. Third, it's documented, understood by the leadership team, and there's a few posters around the place. And then really the gold standard that we're looking for is it's actually understood by all team members.
Yeah,
it doesn't need to be super mega complicated, right? But I did a presentation to a team last week, and it was really focused around alignment. And that's what we're talking about here. And what it really drove home, I suppose, to me as the presenter, because when you're presenting, you're often always learning. And it really reinforced to me just how important the alignment is. Company has, in most circumstances, a company has the labor cost as being the highest cost in a profit and loss. And people, point one, point two, people have this amazing ability, unlike other things inside the profit and loss, to do zero output or to do like 120% output. So it is the largest cost in a business, but also it has the most ability to be variable, the most variability. So that is why the alignment is so important around these things, because this is about behaviors, right? And behaviors are something that has an impact on productivity, because no one wants to work next to a toxic person. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven structured strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan to build the business that you want and the life that you want. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. And you can also check out our books, Made to Thrive, which is about the 5 roles of a CEO, becoming a great CEO rather than just a good CEO in your business. Second is Onboarded, which is about hiring and onboarding great people, making sure that you give yourself the greatest chance for people to succeed in your organization. And then third is Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better, which is about building a business that is better rather than bigger. It's not about building a little business. It's about building a business that compounds, a business that you can actually fall in love with again. Let's move on to question 4. Our long-term vision consistently drives the priorities and initiatives we pursue as a leadership team. So this is interesting because what we're saying here is earlier it cascades, but this is a slightly different question, but it's quite important, the difference. So what does it mean to drive the priorities toward the long-term vision, and why is it so hard to maintain? Andreas, would you like to kick us off?
We've been working with a real estate company here in Perth. And during the first year, we jumping again into the analogy of, let's say, the flag on the top of the mountain. That's long-term goal. And then all the base comes backwards, as Richard, you were mentioning. Eventually, there was an opportunity that it presented to ourselves, which was this fantastic opportunity to double the company almost overnight. Very easy. Actually, we could have achieved that, but we started to reflect on the long-term goal. Is the way in which we are going to double is going to help us achieve that long-term goal? Yes or no? And eventually we came to the realization that no, it won't. It actually will completely derail. And of course, on top of navigating the complexities of doubling in a short term, we could have addressed that, but it wasn't aligned to that long-term goal. The long-term goal, it wasn't just to be the biggest. It was very, very clear on who they wanted to be, where they wanted to be, how many things, where they wanted to spend their energy and where not. And the team, obviously, they took some time to realize and probably to have the courage to say no. But once they said no to that opportunity, there was a different level of energy in the room. They felt that they actually got that long-term goal and that it was guiding their decisions, big decisions like these ones. So it was a fantastic moment for me to also be in the room and witness that moment.
Rich, what does it mean to consistently drive the priorities, and why is it so hard to maintain?
Shiny objects.
Yes.
Bright shiny objects come along. And being an entrepreneur, being an owner and a founder, you have a lot of flexibility. But the reality is that those moments of flexibility are the moments where you have to really ask yourself really tough questions, because it's so easy to say yes, because there's nobody telling you no. And the only thing that does is these guiding principles that, if they're proper and right and well honed, they're easy for you to make the right decisions, and you don't go off getting distracted and then having impact on your team and the company. I had this happen very briefly on a call on Friday. Person phoned me I've been working with for a short period of time, but they have an unbelievably clear vision of where they want to get to in the next 3 years. And they were presented with an opportunity to materialize 40-50% of that number in one fell swoop, because one of their partners said, well, we're interested in buying you. And, he had the momentary, oh, that could be good. I could have this and I could do that. But then he said, but it doesn't really fit with what I was trying to achieve here. And the purpose meant something to me. It wasn't about being bigger. It was the impact he wanted to have in his area of domain, his area of expertise that he spent years building technology to support. And it was just a wonderful moment because he answered it for himself. I just sort of asked him a few questions and ultimately said, no, I know exactly what I'm going to go say. And it was just lovely because it connected everything: purpose, his values, his vision for how this company was going to live in 3 years from now, be in 3 years from now. And, he said no to a check, which could have been quite easy to take. But there was something more important to him. And I think that was where, for the first time, I'd seen him go, that is not consistent with my purpose.
Well, this assessment is really It's like taking your temperature in a way, and this question is reflective of that, as in you think that you might have the cold or the flu or something might be wrong with you. One of the things you do is you take your temperature. It gives you a data point, and that's what this assessment is trying to do. And so when we look at this question, our long-term vision drives priorities and initiatives we pursue as a leadership team. Well, it makes me think about a conversation I had with a leader last week, and his objective was to double the size of the company, but he wasn't able to do that. So there was a disconnect between what was happening with the leadership team and the company and what he was seeing and observing. And so that temperature check is a part of us saying, where are we at as a business and what are we doing? So question 5, our company is consistently making measurable progress towards our long-term vision. So the last one was about we're driving the priorities towards that, but then we're actually doing it, right? So we're actually making that progress. Because I suppose for me, I've seen teams who put BHAGs up or create these long-term goals. They sit there and they're great and they're sexy and they love them and they're all over the walls. But what happens is they actually aren't making any measurable, meaningful progress toward them. So what does it tell you? What does it tell you about a business that's setting priorities towards their long-term vision, but they aren't making measurable progress toward it, Andreas?
Quite often, what tends to happen with leadership teams that I'm working with, they believe in the long-term goal. Some of their priorities are actually building towards that, but they struggle to find a clear set of measures. Either they have too many and they want to communicate all of them, or they have the one, but it's not really enough. So it's doing the work to find that true North Star that is simple and clear enough that it will probably tell us if we are on track or not. That makes me think of a recruitment company that I've been working for the last 4 years. And at the beginning, they wanted to communicate everything to everyone. They were very excited. They presented 15 different measures. And the people were just scratching their heads saying, I don't know, it's just too confusing. Within 2 minutes, I'm going to forget. And they worked until we actually found a clear, simple way for, as I call it, the North Star measure, where everyone can connect to that measure. It was a non-financial measure, by the way, and everyone can connect. Everyone can actually visualize it. They created a visual on how close they are or not from that long-term goal. And it was just a game changer from the complicated to now that simple North Star measure.
I think that for me, when I think about my observations of businesses who have a long-term goal that could be measurable, but they're not making any measurable progress toward it, it really makes me think about what is the percentage of A players in that team. They're busy, but they're not able to work in the business and on the business. And so what is the percentage of A players? Are you carrying these people or are they running in front of you? That's the interesting kind of dilemma that you can be faced with if you're not making this measurable progress toward the long-term goal and you're stuck in the day-to-day. Rich, what's your thoughts?
Absolutely. The thing that I thought about when I was reading this question is I've got a young company and that I've started working with. And the most wonderful thing is about we landed on scorecards as one of the very first things they need to do because they're trying to grow their team. This was also born out of an obsession to have A players in their team because we had landed on what that was defined in their terms. But the most amazing thing was they said, well, we want one metric that goes across every single person's scorecard. This one person will own it, but everybody contributes. And so when you read their scorecards across their entire management team and their next layers, they all have their own metrics, but all share one. And that's the only graphic they show and want to put up when they do their town hall meetings is whether or not the trend is upwards and to the right. Because everybody knows, it's on their scorecard, everybody knows that one metric measures their progress up the hill, so to speak. And for me, it was one of the most remarkable things because sometimes companies struggle so hard to find that measurable set of progress metrics or outcomes that can tell them they're moving in the right direction. But they'd gone completely the other way. I want a lot of A players. I'm going to have the best scorecards and I'm going to have one defining metric that everybody shares. It almost brings tears to your eyes as a coach when you see that because you're like, fantastic. We just have to talk about one number.
Yep. So that is vision. And I a quick reminder, you can take the assessment on our website and you can see where you're performing on vision. Let's now move on to strategy. When you've got a vision and you know where you want to go, that's all good. But strategy matters because strategy is the creation of a unique and valuable position in the market where you are not being commoditized. And commoditization is simply a horrible race to the bottom to give away profit and erode the balance sheet. So the first question in the strategy section, we have clearly defined the customer problems our company exists to solve and the value proposition we deliver to those customers. So I think what we wanted to think about when it comes to this question, or the question I'm asking, is why is it so important that customer problems and value proposition are both understood and documented or clearly documented? So I guess for me, without being understood and documented, it's just the vibe, right? So we know who our customers are. People can say and feel things, but it can wax and wane over time. It can change and, it might be different in winter compared to summer, for example. And so people then, when it waxes and wanes, they tend to take the opportunities that arise rather than seeking out opportunities or filtering and being able to say no to particular opportunities. Andres, what's your thoughts? Why is it so important that customer problems and value proposition are both understood and clearly documented?
Companies are, as we said before, people doing stuff. Now, these people are creating relationships with other people called the clients. If people are doing business with people, we need to understand the human aspect of what drives the customers to buy from us. And if we don't do the hard work and the really understanding what's the vocabulary they're using, when they're buying, what drives them, and all of these behaviors that are actually going in their head, but they're never going to tell us. If we don't do that heavy work, then we won't be able to actually speak their language. When I first met the owner of a trade company in Adelaide, they actually had a poster, the size of my size, let's say, of what they call the customer, the ideal customer. And they all knew that poster and it was, the demographics and all that. So I did ask them, so is that helping you create perhaps better marketing, better conversion rate in the sales? No, not really. We don't relate those two things. They're two different things. So after a bit of work, and by a bit of work, I mean, year-on-year work, they understood how now they can actually have much better marketing impact and much better conversion. To be specific, they went from a 65 conversion rate to an 85 conversion rate by understanding the customer, understanding the language, and using it. Going back to that communication, it has to be very well understood.
Rich.
Well, we talked earlier about this idea that a BHAG is this destination. It brings clarity, right, to the journey. Well, the problem with most companies is that they think that the clarity of what the customer wants is answered by their products and services. So they'll think of it in a sales meeting, right? The salesperson shows up and says, I can do 27 things for you. And the person on the other side of the call is saying, and I've got one problem. You don't understand what my problem is. And so the language of defining everything in terms of the customer's jobs, the customer's needs, the customer's benefits that they're seeking starts the conversation very differently, because now we start writing it the language of what we do in their terms. And then we find out whether or not our products and services actually even fit those, or if they do fit them, how. And in what role do they play? And I think this, for me, this is one of the most pivotal questions, because too often everybody sort of defines everything by what they do and what they produce. And they are convinced that everything is of equal value. They just have to tell this person about it. And in fact, most of the time there's 3, 4, 5 key things that the person's looking for. And you just have to find the language to put your stuff into those terms. And it is very hard to do. I just went through this with one of my clients last week, and, it was an 18-month journey, but finally we had this moment where they went, oh my goodness, everything kind of just fits together now. I could actually use that language to build the language for my website. I could use that as a checklist for how I talk to my customers in a sales call. And I was sort of like, Yes.
Yeah.
That's the only answer I have for you is yes, that's exactly it. That's the moment. And that's why it's so important.
Well, imagine that you walk into a business as a new employee in sales or marketing in those functions of a business. The first question that anybody worth their salt is going to say is, well, what's your unique selling proposition? They may have a similar words to that, but they're really trying to say, okay, what have I got to work here with? Or are you just exactly the same as everyone else? And that is the work that must have been done on strategy in the background. And that really is a good segue into the next question, which is our strategy defines a unique and valuable position in the market and the choices required to build competitive advantage. So, why is it so important that leaders have defined the specific strategic choices? Why is that so important? I'll probably kick it off. Choices make it easy to know what to say no to. And that is the key word that we're really thinking about in this question. And so we had a blockchain company that we worked with. Now, blockchain is an interesting space because there are a million business models to choose from and a million opportunities. And this company was, to be kind, at times trying to boil the ocean. They were trying to take on lots of opportunities. But once we began to hone and we did work on core competencies, we did work on strategy and a lot of the understanding, we were able to narrow it down to the few areas where they could actually successfully monetize and build a bit of differentiation, knowing that there were very clever teams all over the world that were trying to find out which ones they should select as well. So I think that the key is that choices make it easy what to say no to. And that's the really hard part. People try to say yes to everything, which was your earlier point, Rich. So, Rich, back over to you. Why is it so important leaders have defined those specific strategic choices?
For me, it's one of the most difficult things, as you said. But the reality is, it becomes a very simple method for understanding what it is we're actually trying to do as a business. The way I sort of back into this answer is through some work with a trade business, where a trade business could have said all my choices around I have to be good at solar and plumbing and this and that and this and that, and I have to have lots of trucks and I have to have lots of good marketing. Those are all choices that every trades business would make. And so after a lot of pushing, weirdly, the outcome for this one business was that, in fact, the choices they had to make were more about becoming it's kind of strange, an educational institute for technicians, which if they solved that problem, they would actually be better than anybody else in their competitive set because they would have the best trained. They would be a talent magnet. They would have high retention. They would have people who could offer the very best solutions, not just the solutions that every tradesperson would show up with when on a job site. And it's that type of moment when you realize that the choices are not about just competing, they're about advantage. And that's the difference here. I think it's finding the choices that give you the real advantage, not just, well, we're as good as everybody else.
Yeah. Andres, why is it so important that leaders have defined these specific strategic choices?
A construction company that I've been working with, when we first met, the owner told me, well, the way that I do business is whoever knocks on the door, I do business with. And at the same time, I have cash flow problems. And at the same time, I have a very high level of stress in my personal life that is impacting my family, clearly myself, he said. And that's going back to the question, the why, and going back to what you mentioned, Brad, a good strategy, it's equally important what to do, but what not to do. And that was the work that we started to do to clarify what are the choices that we are relentlessly pursuing and unapologetically saying no to. And that was the new message on the website, the new message when he was actually filtering who he wants to do business with and who he doesn't want to do business with. And that completely changed his business model, his cash flow problems. And he's the happiest person, as he mentioned to me last week. he's ever been.
Very nice. Very nice. Question number 8. Leadership clearly and consistently articulate our strategy and competitive advantage, and this is reflected in our sales and marketing communication. So before we're talking about actually having a strategy and documenting it and it's doing something, but this is about the communication from leadership, but also it's making it through to the customer. So it's useful, and that's how you get the action. So why does it matter that the strategy and competitive advantage are reflected in our sales and marketing is what we're really thinking here. Why is this so important? I guess for me, to kick it off, I think that without that, we're just planning in the ivory tower. So we've got the leadership team, they come up with a strategy, it signifies a competitive advantage, and that's where it stops. It doesn't go any further. It just doesn't move any further. It makes me think about a health company that we worked with, and that health company, one of the things that we were doing was setting goals for the patients or the customers. And we centered the strategy around the importance of those goals to those customers and how they would execute them and what the output would be at the end of it. And then we built it, we communicated it to the team, and then we embedded it in the sales and marketing and the operational. But in the end, we saw a really big improvement to the financials, switching from commoditized business to one where we were, I guess, more performing better, but also in control of our future. So I think it gets us out of the ivory tower. Richard, why does it matter that the strategy and competitive advantage are reflected in our sales and marketing?
I'll take a slightly different bent on this, perhaps. I think it comes back to something that I read, and then I was in a couple of workshops with this professor from Harvard, Frances Fry, and she talked about this idea of,
She's great.
What are you going to be deliberately bad at in the service of good, which then is sort of extended into this idea about how do you bring to life your marketing and sales, your core customer, your differentiation in such a way that you actually help your customers, you almost train your customers to do business with you. And let me do the long arc of that. So if you think about the idea of training your customers to do business with you, to buy from you in the right way, then your marketing and sales are the entry point for those moments where the customer is buying from you. So rather than selling at them, you're almost creating the conditions for where they can buy from you in the most optimal way. That's why I love this word that they must be reflected.
Yeah.
Is that the idea that we must see in the language on a website the entry point that is already telling the customer buying from us, what it looks like, how you'll buy from us, what it will feel like. All of those things must start to come to life right at the beginning. Then they can be compounded by sales calls or business development calls. But if there's not a connective tissue between those things, what you're really doing is just talking about yourself, and you're not guiding the customer to buy from you. And I think that is why this is so important, that it's reflected in your marketing and sales.
Andres, why is it so important, or why does it matter that strategy and competitive advantage are reflected in sales and marketing?
Probably building on what you mentioned, Richard, is that connection to the customer, really getting into their minds and understanding why are they buying from us and what we can do to make it easier for them to buy from us and to keep wanting them to buy from us. Over the last 3 years, I've been working with an educational organization, and in Australia, there has been different government regulations where they were putting a few caps on international students, and that has been impacting most education companies. Regardless of that, the last quarter, we had our quarterly planning, and they said it was the best quarter ever. And that's because they've been speaking the student language as well as the agent's language, and in a way that they understand when to engage, when not to engage, when the students are probably being disengaged with their studies. They understand them so well that they understand now how to make it easier for them to want to keep coming back.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that, we want it to be worth something. But again, this is a temperature check, this assessment. So is it actually making it for you, the listener? Question 9, our strategy is translated into quarterly milestones across the key drivers of our competitive advantage over the next 3 years. So why are quarterly milestones across 3 years so important to strategy? I probably want to start off by shouting out Shannon Susko, who's been on this podcast as well and is a great and dear friend of mine, and her work here around swim lanes. And this is the 3-year, the way to execute strategy, I guess, to turn it into something tangible. I'll give you a take on that. Why are quarterly milestones so important to strategy? I was talking with a CEO from Brisbane recently, and they had another coach, somebody else, had built all of their vision and strategy, and it was all great, and it wasn't working. They said, we don't need all of that stuff. We just need you to help us to get it to work. And this is often the problem. They had all of the plans and the documents and it looked great, but it wasn't actually translating into any kind of results. That's why this question is so important to me. Richard, what's your thought? Why are quarterly milestones over 3 years so important to strategy?
Because they are the non-negotiables beyond the dollar sign. So, the swim lanes piece of work that Shannon came up with, we use it all the time. We always start with laying out the quarters. We lay out the financial metrics that go across that. But when you actually have to make choices about where you're going to be 1 year from now, 6 quarters from now, 8 quarters from now, there's this moment where you're already defining the outcome, and now you have to work backwards. And because it's sitting there every quarterly now, and every quarter we get a little closer to it, this is the moment when people start to get really focused on their priorities, making sure they will achieve those milestones. Because the greatest test is you do the swim lane work, and then you get a list of priorities for the quarter that are all about, we should paint the building, and we should buy a new truck, and we should, they got nothing to do with achieving actually that differentiation. And so the swim lanes with those markers, those non-negotiable markers that we review, they just make it really painfully obvious where we need to be at a certain point. And that, I think, is the real value of that, those quarterly milestones.
Andreas?
Imagine that you go on the street and you have to walk 200 meters, but you can only look down to get to that point of destination. What it will end up happening is that you're going to be reacting to whatever is right in front of you. And you're going to be shifting a little bit to the left and to the right. And maybe you feel comfortable and you speed up your pace and then you slow down. But you don't really know if that is the most efficient way to get to that point. And perhaps you might get lost. So that's why in the work that many companies say, yeah, we do have priorities and we do work. That's the point where we need to understand what percentage of the priorities that we are executing are building towards our strategy, our goals, and which ones are just clearing the operational backlog that all companies have and must probably clear every now and then, but it's keeping that balance. Because otherwise, they're going to keep reacting rather than compounding.
Yeah. Question 10. Our strategy is producing strong revenue growth, improving gross margins, and increasing demand from our ideal customers. Strategy is expensive. And so we want strategy. Strategy is expensive. What do I mean by that? Well, we are spending time and money and effort to get things done. So why are we using revenue growth or strong revenue growth, improving gross margins, and increasing demand from ideal customers as the measure of success in strategy? And what does it tell you when a business is strong on 2 but not 3? I think for me, it makes me think about telephone call that I took recently from owner of a business where he had promoted the CFO into CEO. And he said, I'm delighted. I've never made as much profit, but revenue is going backwards. And it's really unnerving. He had grown revenue when this owner had been running the business and he'd handed it over to the CFO to become the CEO, as I mentioned. And he said, we've got more profit and cash than we've ever had. It's just fantastic. But every year, over 3 years, he could see that revenue going backward. So he was growing the gross margin, but not the revenue. He was operationalizing or improving in that manner. So I think that a good strategy, it grows demand. And that demand creates strong revenue growth, and it also gives us the ability to improve gross margins. Richard, what's your thoughts? Why does it matter that we're strong not only on two, but all three?
Because it's a balanced business. It's a business that is consciously looking at all aspects of its business. A lot of the time we'll see the imbalance, right? We'll see a fixation on the top line, but gross margin is decimal point erosion every quarter. So we're getting more and more business, but we're slightly less profitable. Or, we just need more revenue, so we will go and get more customers. But more customers are not ideal customers. They're just any customer that was happened to pass by the building. And then we start to wonder why we're getting frustrated with our customer base and why they're not moving when we market to them and sales to them, because they are not really our target customer. And so this question is all about this intersecting balance. One must be thinking about all of these things as you execute your strategy. Otherwise, you have these unintended second and third order consequences that you suddenly find yourself 2 years in going, right, this is not so much fun anymore because now I don't have the profit to do investment, or I don't have the right mix of customers. And so you start to have a business that becomes suboptimal. So for me, this is like a three-part Venn diagram where everything has to be equal size and equally interlocking. And that's the test. That's when the strategy comes together.
And that's why that owner of the business was talking to me, because he felt that Venn diagram was out of play, and he was deeply worried that absence of whatever was missing for him in revenue growth was going to catch up with him and come to a crisis point eventually. Andreas, why does it matter that we've got all three?
Last week, I was in a meeting with two business owners, and they had this question. Andres, can you explain to us which line of the P&L or balance sheet, for that sake, should I look at to understand my growth? At that point, I realized that they were looking at growth from a single point, let's say single line, a single number, whether it's other revenue in isolation or gross margin in isolation or any other profit level. The point that we're trying to make with this assessment and these questions is to identify what's the difference between growth for growth's sake versus compounding growth. And that compounding growth concept is not just one thing, but it is the summation of all these parts that we are describing. So this is why using one and not the other, it creates that Venn diagram completely out of balance. Of course, we can understand what is the impact of having one or two and not the third one. But this is why it's not an this or that, it's an and. We need to work on these three things at the same time.
Yeah, I sometimes with leadership teams leadership teams who are, let's say, blinded by revenue, I will say, if we didn't have any visibility to revenue, but we only had gross margin, what would we do different? And it can be a problem because people, revenue is vanity, as the old saying goes. And so people can be really focused in on that. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode covering vision and strategy. Please stay tuned next week for our next episode, the second part in this series, where we're planning to talk about execution, the economic engine, and leadership, three really important parts that bring it all together. I guess like a jigsaw is the way that we're viewing it and the way to assess your business. It has been such a great honor to run 100 episodes of this podcast with some amazing people along the way. Richard and Andreas. Richard, I'll start with you. Any reflections on our conversation today and these two topics?
Well, for me, it's an incomplete story. I need to get to the end of next episode for it all to come back to the point I made at the beginning. I think what I love about what we're trying to do here is give this holistic view of the business, of a business that we can test on many dimensions. And today was just great because we dealt with a couple of the big ones. So for me, the discussion around strategy was just fabulous today. So looking forward to next week.
Any closing comments?
I mentioned this before we actually started to record this episode, that as I was preparing and reading the full assessment, it made me actually reflect on my coaching style, how hard I am pushing my clients or where I'm not probably doing that. And it was such a before and after point.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, thank you again for joining us. I hope that you have got some insights. Again, you can go to our website, evolutionpartners.com.au, and you can see the 25 questions. You can complete the assessment yourself, and it may be interesting to get our take if you have completed that for yourself. I can almost guarantee that everyone will get some really good insights in the comprehensive report that we've created. Thank you again, and please do join us next week for episode 2, part 2 in this series. All the best. Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.